Man, I hope you guys have been able to look at the phone bulletin, the Loop bulletin over the past few weeks. Each week we're going to try to add a couple of new features, but one of the things that people are using it for is to add prayer requests. So I'll come in Monday morning and check, and I usually have found, I think each week I've found one additional prayer request that people have made through the Loop bulletin. One that I'd like to add that I just put on the bulletin this morning is my mother was rushed to the hospital last night with some apparent heart issues. Not sure if she's had a heart attack or if she's an asthmatic, so it's possible that she had had a severe asthma attack. I called the emergency room this morning, and they're working on getting her into a room. So she's not placed in a room yet, and that's all the information that they would give me. So that's all the information that I'm going to give you guys. But if you would keep her in your prayers as well. Next week, using the Loop bulletin, I plan to have some lesson notes and questions that you can go along with our discussion or use to go along with our discussion. And also some additional sermon notes in there that will also be helpful to you, I hope. Planning to make that a little bit more interactive each week as we learn how to use it better and better. But if you do have a prayer request, there's an easy link on that app, on that bulletin. You can just hit submit a prayer request. You can select that to be public or private. If it's private, we'll keep it in the office amongst the elders, and we'll be praying over that together. If it's public, we'll put that on the bulletin as we update it throughout the week, and we'll make sure that everybody is praying for your loved one or the concern that you have. So appreciate those of you who are using that. We'll get more interactive with that on a week-to-week basis. So today we're going to continue our discussion of Jesus in the book of John. Last week we said that John is the oldest gospel written. Therefore, it's the newest gospel that we have in our Bible. I think I said that right. John wrote that gospel later on in his life. So he wrote that during his older period, therefore it is newer to us. And one of the things that John tried to illustrate as he wrote that gospel to us is the divinity of Jesus, the identity of Jesus, and also the way that Jesus' teaching was misunderstood by most followers at that time. As he is making proclamations, as he is showing a renewal of the covenants of God, as he is fulfilling the gospel, they're constantly misunderstanding what it is that he's doing. And so last week we looked at 4 instances. We looked at the wedding feast first, right, when he turned water into wine. We looked at 4 instances in which he did that and fulfilled some of the prophecies and statements of God. And so today we're going to look at 4 festivals. Probably only get through 2. I anticipate that this is going to be, it's going to take us 2 weeks to get through this. We're going to look at the Sabbath feast first. And not many of us think of Sabbath as a feast time. If you're like me, you thought about Sabbath as a rest time, right? That Sabbath was a day that you really didn't get to do anything. And so before we get into John chapter 5, though, we're going to say a prayer and then talk for a little bit. Father God, we are grateful for the sunshine today. Grateful for a beautiful, beautiful spring. Lord, sometimes our summer and winter just seem to mix together so much so that we don't enjoy a spring. And Lord, you've given that to us this year, and we're grateful for it, for the ability to enjoy just being outdoors and be comfortable and watch everything turn green and see newness of life. God, we're mindful of those who are sick and hurting and suffering. Lord, those who are alone, those who are still struggling with the coronavirus, Father, not only here but across our world. And God, ask that you would just go ahead and come. Lord, we would love it if you would come and renew your kingdom in a complete way. Father, that you could look at us and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And that we could enter into eternity not only with you within us, but eternity with you alongside us. God, I pray that you be with us as we look into your word today, as we look at your son, Jesus, and the things that he did, the things that he said, and the way that he lived. And I pray that you would open up our eyes to some of the connections that you've made between what you've written in the Old Testament and what you've allowed to be written in the New, and that we would grow closer to you because of this, that your Bible would become that much more majestic to us, that it would become precious to us, that we would see that indeed this is a unique book. And we pray things in Jesus Christ's name, and amen. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from John chapter 5, and we're going to look at Jesus' interaction on the Sabbath. But here's a couple things that I want to talk about, or want us to talk about, just a little bit before we get there. So when you think about Sabbath, what is Sabbath about? When you think about Sabbath, what do you think Sabbath is about? All right, so a time dedicated to remembering God and a time dedicated to rest. And that's actually what Shabbat, or what we call Sabbath, means. It means to cease or to stop, right? And it's taken from Genesis when God created the world. Yes, sir? Yes, so it made the seventh day special, right? Because God rested on the seventh day. 7 being a number across Jewish heritage that symbolized completeness. And anytime you see a number mentioned 3 times in a row, it's the complete of the complete, or a statement said 3 times in a row, it's the ultimate of that statement. So when the angels cry out to God, holy, 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 it means that He is the most holy thing in existence. So when you see 3 sevens in a row, it's the most complete. All right? So thank you. Any other thoughts about Sabbath before we read this story? It's called a Sabbath celebration. Why would it be a celebration? It doesn't feel like a party to me when I think about it. Yes. Mm. Okay, so to kind of pair what you were saying together and do my best, that God rested on the seventh day and it was the end of His creation. So He's celebrating that all has been finished and that all has been created. And then help me restate what you said, Don, because I'm doing my best to say these things. Say it one more time. Yeah, so Sabbath is connected to God's deliverance of the Israelites from their slavery in Egypt. So it symbolizes this deliverance. So in that way, it becomes a celebration. And I think about the fact that many of us have grandkids who are graduating at the end or the beginning of next month. They'll be finishing up their school year at the end of this month. We'll be celebrating Maddie completing high school at the end of this month. And so there's a celebration there. No more will she have to go back to that school. No more will she be in high school. She's entering into a new phase of existence. And so there's a celebration of this new phase of existence, this celebration of God's provision. And it's not just about rest, is it? It's about reliance. It's about reliance that allows you to rest. You're given the gift of being able to rest. We look at it as an obligation to rest, which would force us to slow down and not be able to do the things that we want to do, right? Because we work hard 5 or 6 days a week, and we want to play hard at least one day. We don't really look for recuperation in the way that God had ordained recuperation. By show of hands, how many of you wish that we could observe, or we do observe, or would have to observe Sabbath the way the Jews observed Sabbath every 7 days. Anybody here want that? All right, so I see a couple of you guys want that. That would mean that Friday evening, as the sun went down around 6 o'clock, you're done until Saturday evening around 6 o'clock, right? Aside from a few things. Yes, ma'am. Mm. All right, so what I'm hearing, in case you didn't hear it or you've joined us online, is that in our American heritage, we used to have a period of time in which stores were closed, everything kind of shut down, and we were, I don't want to say forced, that's not a, we were blessed to be able to eat dinner together and have this time together, and it was kind of a cultural thing seen across the U.S. in which we spent time together. Now, I have to confess to you that I sometimes wish Chick-fil-A was open on Sundays, right? I sometimes miss that food on Sundays because many of us will go out to eat this afternoon, and we enjoy that, which means other people have to work in order for us to enjoy the gift that we're given, right? So tip your waiters, right? But yes, absolutely, there was a time not too long ago where culturally we took a bit of a rest. We took a bit of a rest, and maybe we took that for granted. And you don't really know what you've got until it's gone, as the cliche says, right? So let's look at Jesus' interaction on the Sabbath in John chapter 5. I'm going to look at verses 2 through 18 of John chapter 5. All right, John chapter 5, verses 2 through 18. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic or Hebrew, called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Verse 7, the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" And they asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" Verse 13, now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn as there was a crowd in the place. Afterwards, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you're well. Sin no more so that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. What are some things that stick out to you from that reading of Jesus and his interaction on the Sabbath? Yet there is no good thing that's beyond being corrupted. I think time and time again we see the good ordinances of God given to people, and then twisted over time to give people in power more power. Thank you for sharing that. What else? Yeah, so on the seventh day, God rested, but he wasn't put to rest. He's always working. All right, so Jesus cared more about the man than he cared about the law. He cared about that man's wellness and benefit. His compassion towards the man. Thank you for that. Anybody find it interesting that Jesus told him to take up his mat and walk, knowing that it's the Sabbath, knowing that what he is calling him to do may be in fact controversial? He tells him to take up his mat and trudge that thing on home. You know, for me, many, many times I've not really noticed that. Even though John really points it out that the man gets in trouble for carrying the mat, I haven't really thought about Jesus as the one who told him to carry it on the Sabbath. So was it lawful for that man to carry his mat on the Sabbath? At the pool of Bethesda? Well, okay, so the question asked was, did the man stay there for 24 hours, no food, no water, no anything, as an invalid at the pool of Bethesda? My understanding is that historically what you read is that pool is sort of a hot spring and that it bubbled up. So angels may or may not have been present and actually healing people. It may just have been that the water was warm and soothing, and it gave people relief from their aches and pains, and that the tradition was the first one in gets the blessing. There's just some contention over that, how that worked among biblical scholars. But from the reading, it appears that maybe people who took care of him dropped him off, and they probably brought him food either at the end of the day or he had something at the beginning of the day. And so he was a person who was cared for. He just couldn't care for himself. That's what I understand as I read it. You know, Ginger made an interesting point earlier that when she said Jesus regarded people over the law, that the law, he was able to navigate the law in a perfect way, in ways that outsiders would assume was him breaking the law. And so I think one of the questions we need to ask is, did Jesus actually break the Sabbath law, or did he fulfill the Sabbath law? He fulfilled it. Because we know that Jesus never sinned, right? So what Jesus is doing is not a sin, regardless of the opinions of the religious leaders in and of that time. And I think to really understand that, one of the things that we would want to do is just know a couple of things. So Mark chapter 2 and verse 27. As I'm turning there, it takes me just a second. Know that over time, more and more requirements were added to the Sabbath mandate. At first, it was don't prepare food, don't do things, don't do work on the Sabbath. So what is work? What is work? Okay. Anything that takes a physical effort. But sometimes we would call some of that play, right? Let's think about this. Would it be fair? Would it be fair for us to define work? And this is not going to be perfect, okay? I'll just lay that before you. But to begin to think about work as anything that we do to provide for ourselves. You go to work, right? You work on your car. This work is something done for your own benefit in many ways. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, so what Greg was saying is that the idea of not working on the Sabbath is that there needs to be a recognition of God's provision, that God is taking care of you. And so you do all your work on those 6 days, and then that seventh day is completely reliant on what God provided for you through those six. And so that kind of work for yourself is done. And then you remember that Jesus said, you judge for yourself, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? There's a difference between doing good and doing work. And that's kind of what Greg said. There are good works, and then there's work. Yes, sir. Yeah, so Jesus is saying, hey, you had mercy. Which one of you had an ox in the ditch, wouldn't pull it out? You would be merciful towards your ox because that ox has value to you. But this person who God values, you're not valuing, so you've got your whole mindset twisted on what is lawful to do on the Sabbath, right? You've got all of that messed up. And I think in order to not be so hard on the Pharisees, because it's really easy to hate on the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders of that time, one thing that you made me think about, Greg, when you were sharing your thoughts, is that the thing that you said was, we're all like that. We all kind of get in our mind our traditions, and we're stuck in our own ruts. Is that we work so hard to understand what it is that we're supposed to do, that once we understand it, we're moving on to the next thing that we're really trying to understand, and we forget that there's always more to learn about what we've seen, right? What we've seen actually is always bigger than what we've gotten out of it. Just like when anyone talks, the average person remembers 10 minutes of what was said, right? Or 10 words or 10 different things. They can't hold on to all of it. And so we latch on to simple caricatures of the truth in order to be able to continue to function. And so the call of a follower of Jesus is to continually expand the picture of what it is that you know about God, His character, and your ability to reflect Him to the world. And so that's where the Pharisees have worked so hard. In fact, they've added and added and added, and they've made this law more restrictive. What God called a celebration, they've turned into an obligation, and they've stolen the joy of the Sabbath for the people of God. And Jesus loved the Sabbath. As you read through Scripture, you'll see Him observe the Sabbath in many different ways. All right, so I said Mark chapter 2 and verse 27. I think that's what I said. I'm terrible with numbers. That's why I've got it all written down. Yeah, Mark chapter 2 and verse 27. I'll just read verse 23 through 27. One Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did? When he was in need and was hungry, he and all those who were with him, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any of the priests to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. I think a lot of times we read about the Sabbath and we think the Sabbath is this thing that God ordained to restrict his people. And really, the Sabbath is a celebration that God gifted his people to allow them to experience the fullness of the world that he created. Because if all we did was work, we might never notice the beauty that exists in the world. Our Sabbaths are pretty much called vacations, right? And sometimes we do things like go to Disney World and we see man-made creations. But oftentimes we want to go to places like the beach or to see the Grand Canyon or another part of the world that we've never seen before. And in those days, we've worked really hard to set up the provisions that we need to enjoy that next 4 or 5 days. And in those days, we actually see things, and unless you're really trying to wrangle kids, right? If you're trying to wrangle kids, it's a little different. But in those days, when you're actually experiencing rest, you can fully embrace the beauty of the creation that God has given us. Now, the way God had decided to do it was to give us one of those every week so that we would stay connected to the provision and the completeness of what God had created. All right, so how do the Pharisees get their idea of the Sabbath so messed up? How is it that they've taken the teaching of the Lord, how is it that they've gotten it twisted? All right, they've become too strict. Their thinking is black and white, she said. It's an either-or situation. Either I'm working or I'm not, and to work is to do anything that might even cause a sweat, right? They had created a limit on even how far you could walk on the Sabbath, called a Sabbath day's walk. Yes, ma'am. Mhm. All right, so what I'm hearing is that, as is typical of human beings, we build fences around things that we think hold potential dangers. Because in the Old Testament, if you didn't observe the Sabbath, the penalty was death. You could get stoned for that, right? And so in order to protect from the stoning, which actually I don't think you ever see anyone get stoned in the Bible on the Sabbath, do you? And even in this New Testament world, they're just mad at Jesus for working on the Sabbath. They're not out to kill him for working on the Sabbath. They're out to kill him because he made himself equal with God, from what we read from John chapter 5. So to bring that home and into our world a little bit more deeply, and I really appreciate that comment, I'm going to give you one example of how we do this. that is a little bit less serious. And then I want to invite you to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the ways that we build fences around things that keep us from loving the people God created. Okay, so what are some ways that we have in our search to protect that we have hindered ourselves from doing the work God has called us to do? So these religious leaders weren't helping the sick on the Sabbath because it was the Sabbath and you weren't supposed to work, right? And in fact, they were disdaining other people who were. All right? So when I think about building fences around things, I think about our language. Every household has words that shouldn't be said in the household, right? You don't say that word. This word's okay. And in every single household, the dialect is different, isn't it? Like, especially when your kids are young, like you can't say the S word, right? And that S word is stupid, right? But when you get older, the S word is something different. When you hit 13, you can say the S word, but now you can't say the S word, right? So we do this. And so in my house, the rule was you can't use adjectives. Right? And so any kind of descriptory term that described how you felt. So you can't say shoot. Like we couldn't say shoot in our house. We couldn't say dang, D-A-N-G, in our house because they sounded like a word you weren't supposed to say. Right? So not only do you not say the word you're not supposed to say, don't say words that sound like the words that you're not supposed to say. And then you could take it a little bit further because when the kid is like 3, it's like don't even say anything that comes close. Don't even say something in angst, right? Don't use that. You can say I'm mad, but you can't say that's dumb or that's stupid. So we do that just as an illustration. We build fences around things that we're trying to protect our children's behavior from. Right, we build gates around these things. And not to open up an argument of whether that's helpful or unhelpful, that's just an illustration. But what are some ways that we build fences around things in life that keep us from helping those God has called us to help? What are some ways that you can think of? And I'm not saying that you personally do this, but you can think of that we as a society or churches tend to do that. Man, thank you for that. So he's saying that a lot of times we pass people on to the professionals and feel like we're not capable to do that. Like that's for them to do and for us to maybe move them along or get them in line. And in some cases, people do need professional help too. And so that's hard. That's really hard. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's very easy for us to depend on a government agency to do the work that Christ has called his people to do, is what she was saying. And so, yeah, I think about welfare, and I'm not trying to down any form of welfare. Some of that program is definitely a blessing to people, and because it exists, maybe sometimes it's easy for us to just sit back and go, oh, that's the government's job. I think about the fact that hospitals were started by Christians and schools, as we know them, were started by Christians. And at some point, the state takes over and takes what has been a great thing as a service by followers of Jesus, and we're able to kind of let that go in some ways. Thank you for sharing that. Mm. Man, yeah, so the statement is that there are a lot of times that we look at situations and think that somebody will take care of that and that we don't have time to do it. And a weekly Sabbath practice might change some of that. What if we had a day of our week that was solely dedicated to realizing God as provider and doing the help that we see before us that we're called to do? Yes, sir. Yeah, I appreciate that. So, what Bryce is saying is that the most effective way to bring the gospel to a family is through the male leader of that family. If you have a whole family, now we live in a situation where many people are in broken families, and that does not change what Bryce is saying. Is that uh, what I'm hearing you say is that we need to open our eyes to the calling that God has given us to reach other people, and one of the best ways to do that is through the male leader in the family. Is that fair? Yeah. So Jesus is seen as sinful because of the good work that he's doing, which is a total reflection of what God would do. Anything that you see Jesus do on earth is exactly what God would do on earth, because he's the exact representation of God's being, right? So everything you see Jesus do is a mirror image of what God would do on the earth. Yet the Pharisees want to kill him. They're upset with him for doing good, and they want to kill him for the claims. So how is Jesus? We said over here that he's not breaking the law, he's fulfilling it, right? How is Jesus fulfilling the law? By doing what he's doing on the Sabbath. Like, what does that even mean? So you're like, Good Samaritan, Good Samaritan, Good Samaritan. Ah, yeah, yeah. Yes. So what she was saying is that sometimes we just get this tunnel vision of what we think God wants from us, and we ignore all the opportunities that God gives us to serve other people in our effort to serve God, who's called us to serve other people. Yes, sir. All right, that's a beautiful statement. So by Jesus' actions and what Jesus is doing, Jesus is opening up a Sabbath rest to all creation. Is that what you were saying? So Jesus, by fulfilling this law, is actually, I guess for an imagery's sake, taking the cup of the law and causing it to overflow unto all people. Because as a follower of Jesus Christ, you are called in Romans an heir of Abraham, aren't you? We become Abraham's heir according to the promise by what Jesus did. Therefore, we are privileged to participate in any of the blessings that he gave Israel. You're free to celebrate Passover if you want to. You're not obligated to do it, but you're free to celebrate it as an adopted Jew, adopted child of Israel, because of what Jesus did and his fulfillment of this law. And so he illustrates what it is to do work on the Sabbath. 2 points I'd like to point out as we're drawing to a close, and then I'll give you a hint or a teaser for next week. The Sabbath regulations, as interpreted by the Pharisees, had lost the intent of the Sabbath prescribed in the Old Testament. So the rules that they were observing were now human-made, and they were not God-made. And so that's why Jesus was able to navigate those rules in different ways, because those were human rules and not God's rules. The Sabbath proclaimed at creation was intended to serve mankind as a holy day, giving them a blessing and observing God's rest and restoration in their life. So nothing of Jesus or his disciples' actions were contrary to the purpose or the intent of Sabbath observance. So Jesus wasn't rewriting a law. He was showing us what it was like to live according to that law in its fullness. So that is fulfilling the law. If you live this law as it was meant to be lived, this is how you would live it, is what Jesus is showing us. And I think that that's important for us to remember, because when we're on vacation, we still have opportunities to do the work of the Lord. And that's what Jesus is showing them. Hey, you're in this Sabbath rest. You're enjoying the provision of God. And it was a feast every week. Okay, it was a big deal every single week, the Sabbath was. And it was a time of worship. They would go to synagogue and they would worship and they would hear readings from the Word. And they would enjoy the presence of God and the presence of each other and celebrate the goodness of God. And from time to time, they would drive by somebody who needed help. And as people illustrating the character of God, they were called to help them, even if that caused them to get a little sweaty. Because the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So Jesus illustrates to us what it is to live out the character of God according to that feast as God had intended for his people to live. And in doing so, the world rejects him. Just like if you took it on your own hands to be the local welfare organization and you were doing it the way God called you to do it, do you think you would experience some rejection of people in our society today? I think you would. I think some people would say, who do you think you are to try to do this good when the government already exists to do it? That's one of the big lessons that we learn from this section. All right, I appreciate your comments. Looks like it's time to get ready for worship. And y'all don't forget to pray for my mom.